I was a single mom raising two young kids. I was rising fast in this big, massive global business, traveling the world constantly, sitting on boards, active in church, PTA, industry groups. And I had this great big social life on top of it. And from the outside, it looked impressive, but inside, it was chaos.
Welcome to Women Who Make It, real conversations with women in the food and beverage industry who are building careers, leading teams, and figuring it all out. After years of building females in food, I've had conversations with some of the most brilliant women in the industry, and they shared the real stuff. The pivots, the boundaries, the burnouts, and the moments of, is this even working, before it finally clicked. So I hit record, and now you get to hear it too. We're Women Who Make It, so let's dig in.
Welcome back to Women Who Make It, where we talk with women shaping the future of the food and beverage industry. And we have the honest conversations about leadership, career, and life as it really unfolds. I'm your host, Angela Dodd, and today's guest is someone whose work and philosophy deeply aligns with all things females in food. Michele Fite has spent more than 30 years leading across the food and beverage industry, from managing multi-billion-dollar global businesses at DuPont to commercializing breakthrough food technologies, to now advising founders and CEOs through their most critical inflection points. And one thing that Michele is known for is her belief that there is no playbook. The most successful leaders, especially women, are those willing to write their own rules. Michele, I am so excited to have you here today and to explore these 5 rules with you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun. This has been a conversation I've been wanting to have for quite some time, because I've had the great pleasure of getting to hear about your career journey and about some of these rules that you've come up with over the course of your entire career. And I think it's such a powerful way to pass on these insights and this legacy to the next generation, and kind of sums up all these lessons that you've learned. So for our listeners, we're going to be diving into some of these 5 rules that Michele's learned over her career journey. And if we started off with a rule number 1, and I've heard you say this, it's not about balance, right? It's about the seasons in life. And I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about this notion that has been with you throughout your career, and about it not being about balance in your career and life, but really about the seasons.
That's great. And thank you so much for having me here. And I'm so excited to be with you. So, balance and thinking differently. So honestly, what started me thinking differently was experience, and just having experience and frustration in my life, Angela. So early in my career, I really believed that balance was something that I could engineer. If I just worked harder, if I organized better, if I optimized my time, everything would eventually just sit neatly in place. You've probably heard that as well. It's like, if we just engineered our time, everything will work out perfectly. And I realized that balance assumes everything can be weighed evenly at the same time. And, real life just doesn't work that way, does it? Yeah. So, and careers don't grow that way. And girl, you and I both know families don't function that way. And so once I stopped chasing balance and started asking, what season am I in? Everything for me changed. And thinking about seasons gave me language for prioritization. And Angela, it gave me permission really to let go of the rest. And I was one of those people that chased balance for a long time, because I thought that's what successful women were supposed to do. Hold everything evenly all the time. Let's lean in. And for a while, I really looked like I was pulling that stuff off. And you've heard me tell this story before. I was a single mom raising two young kids. I was rising fast in this big, massive global business, traveling the world constantly, sitting on boards, active in church, PTA, industry groups. And I had this great big social life on top of it. And from the outside, it looked impressive, but inside, It was chaos. And importantly, my kids were feeling it. And that's when I realized balance wasn't the problem. It was that expectation of balance. I wasn't feeling, I was just in a season that required focus, not evenness, you know.
I want us to like travel into this a little bit more and talk about what were some of those outcomes, because I relate so deeply to that. I think it's when the first time I heard you say this story, and I wanted to ask you, like, tell our listeners a little bit more about that moment, that burnout moment, that breakthrough. And I think, hearing you say single mom, you're doing all this, you're rising fast, you're balance, you're trying to fit all these different priorities in. And I think that's so many of us, right? Because ultimately what has to happen is something, you're going to have to say no to something. So as you like made that decision, I'm curious, what did some of those no's look like for you?
Yeah. So I have to tell you, this moment of like getting around like clarity, I had to get to a place of clarity for myself and really get honest. And I'm going to talk about how you make decisions and get to these no's. But I wanted to talk about getting clarity and being honest and getting uncomfortably honest with yourself and myself. Oh gosh, it was so hard to do.
I'm sweating just thinking about it.
I love that.
My palms are literally like,
okay,
oh
sorry.
God, we have to look in the mirror right now. What's this gonna,
Yeah,
this is gonna be painful.
But for me at that time, and this is just the season I was in then, because we'll talk about like how you have different seasons in your life, because I'm in a real different season now. But at that point, I had to look at my life and ask, what actually matters if everything can't be first? Because everything can't, like we started off with balance, and everything can't be first. And you know this, you've got these young kids at home, and you're building this amazing career and this amazing organization, this amazing group, Females in Food. But for me, at that point in time, the answer was very clear. I wanted to raise these happy, healthy, grounded kids to become these amazing adults. But I also wanted a career with meaning, not just a title chase. Now, once I named that season with that clarity of those values, everything shifted for me. I stopped measuring myself against a myth of having it all. And I stopped feeling behind, because by getting clear on those values, I started to feel intentional. And that's a word you're going to hear me use a lot. Getting intentional about my choices and those no's.
Yeah. Intentional is my word for 2026, by the way.
Awesome. I love that, Angela. That is so powerful. Do you feel power in that?
Yeah, it is, because it gives you this different level of empowerment or freedom just to get that focus, right? And being really intentional about those decisions. So, I mean, as we move into some of these additional rules into Rule 2, is there anything else that you want to share around that period of finding that balance and how it changed you, or in how you treated yourself during those periods or others? Because I don't want to cut us short from this first piece of balance and really those shifts that started to take place in your life during that time.
I'm glad you're asking that. So one thing I do want to share is it helped me a lot at work. So, it wasn't just a choice about my children, but it showed up at work for me as well, because it helped me make decisions faster and cleaner. So instead of asking, like, how can I squeeze this in? I started asking, does this serve what matters most right now?
Yeah.
And if the answer was no, it was a no. Even if it was a good opportunity, and even if it really looked good on paper, it was really impressive on paper. So think about that. There was things that could come for me at work that were great, if it didn't serve what mattered most in those two things that were really important, it was a no. And so that clarity didn't limit my leadership, it strengthened it.
Yeah.
And more people experience me as more focused, more decisive, and more grounded because I was in that. And it wasn't always easy because I had to give up things that I really maybe wanted to do. And so what happened around all of that is my guilt was replaced with compassion.
Mm.
And when I accepted that this was a really heavy season in my life, I stopped expecting myself to be performing at 100% everywhere in my life. And I just let go of a lot of shame.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful and such an important message for so many women to feel right now, because so many do feel like they're in a season of life and failing, right? That they're not moving at the pace of others and that they're not keeping up. And I think giving all of ourselves that compassion, but to lead with clarity instead of that guilt.
And I love what you just said about keeping up with others. And I think we're going to talk about that in another rule, and we'll get into that because I think it goes back to defining your values and not living by others' rules. But we'll go into that.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's roll straight into that. I love it. Rule number 2, you talk about investing in what serves you and your values. This one is so important because you've talked about openly sharing about investing, not what looks impressive on paper, but truly what serves your value. And during one of the busiest seasons of your life, leading, as you've told us, with a demanding career, raising kids as a single parent, you made very intentional trade-offs and you had to get really clear about what mattered most during that season. Tell us, what gave you the confidence to make those choices that didn't necessarily look conventional from the outside? And what did that
mean? So what gave me the confidence to make these choices is from alignment and not approval. So I talked about understanding values. So being really clear on values. I aligned with my values. I was incredibly confident and clear on those values. So I was confident in my alignment.
Yeah.
And I didn't seek anybody's approval on that. And once I had alignment on my values, then I made choices. And because I was a mother and a single mother, and I wanted this career, I had to start with some other honest questions. What choices would allow me to honor both raising these wonderful kids and having that career that I wanted? Now, choices that were not going to be perfect, but sustainable. And so that meant stripping my life down to its essentials and investing my time, my energy, and money only where it truly served those values. And so that alignment, not approval, meant things like I stopped all my volunteering that I loved to do. Yeah. I stopped those social dinners because, I loved going out with all my girlfriends. I said no to PTA. I missed my high school reunions. I missed my family reunions because I was focused on the career and the rest of my time with raising those children. And so from the outside, it probably looked like I was disappearing, but internally I was deeply, deeply clear. And I would call that clarity that it's incredibly grounding because the noise can get loud on the outside. Yeah. I think you've heard me say this, Angela, like I had, my cousins were saying, why aren't you at the, family reunion? You're the person that was leading all the games and planning everything. Or my girlfriend, my high school girlfriends were saying, God, we haven't seen you at a high school reunion. And when that pressure is out there, if you're grounded in the values and the choices you've made, then you don't feel the guilt and and shame or anything when that pressure is there because you're clear. And that's what was really important to me.
One of the first times I heard you talk about this, it's such eh, defining moment for me, because I do think, especially with social media, we see all these things that we're like missing out on, right? In everybody else's life. And when you have that type of clarity to say, I have to say no to these social things right now, right? I'm serving these priorities that are most important. And I know I've heard you talk about investing even in money and saying, I'm going to make sure I'm taking care of my body. I'm going to invest in my personal trainer. I'm going to have a great nanny. My household work is going to get done, like all these things that you're like, in order for me to build this career over here, I have to invest over here. And how am I going to make that happen? But as much as like investing in the money side of it and the resources to help you in that side of life, I think it's also just as important to recognize that you also had to say no to some of these social things and being
Absolutely
really grounded in that. And you've also said like these friends have come back around and say, these friends are there for you later, right? It's a season that you move through.
Absolutely. And that's a great comment that you make, because it wasn't complete abandonment. I still wrote Christmas cards. I still texted or this is where social media was so helpful, so I could stay connected or in touch. And some things were abandonment. Like some friends went away completely, but you heard the story. My high school friends, when I did reconnect after the children were gone, my daughter got married and I invited many of the old friends and they showed up, and I have reconnected with all my the majority of my high school friends, and my sorority sisters were still there, and I'm back connected with them and rekindled many of those in this new season in my life. And I'm excited to have that. Now, I missed close to 20 years of those relationships, but they're there. And I'm making new friends or new things and new volunteering work and all of that. So, but the ending story is I am so happy and proud of my children. And I love the career that I have. It was worth everything.
That's amazing. I think and I hope those who are listening also find some affirmation in that like, these hard choices that you're making right now or feeling that you need to make, there is life on the other side of it all. And to know when you look back that you have no regrets. So as we move through, so just to kind of keep everybody moving through all these rules with us and getting clear with yourself, right? And recognizing balance is a season, and then moving through and aligning with those values. The third thing that you talk about is really showing up when it matters. And you talked about your kids, right? They were a big part of all of this. And I know the conversations that you had to have with them around some of this, but in this career of yours, you're leading a multi-billion-dollar organization during this time, and travel was intense. I've heard you say, jumping off a plane from Asia and going to sports practice, you couldn't be everywhere all the time. And you had to think about what presence meant and showing up when it mattered. Walk us through that and what that looked like and how you really decided when to show up and how it mattered most.
Yes, that is such a great question, because those mattering moments, like you've said, I had to work with my kids, because I realized when I was trying to figure that out, I was guessing, and I was simply guessing wrong. And so I always assumed that presence meant quantity. And I've seen this with so many women that, the more you do, the better it is. Because I thought being a good parent meant trying to be everywhere all the time. And I was simply exhausting myself trying to live up to that expectation that wasn't even grounded in what my kids wanted or actually needed. So I needed to talk to them and ask them. And Angela, I didn't figure this out on my own. I figured this out through therapy and through the counseling and support of a good child psychologist. And that was part of my team that I spent money on to help me be the best that I could be at this. while I was, like you said, managing that crazy career. And I'm going to give you an example here with my son. And I did this at all stages of their life when they were just young children, toddlers, elementary school, all the way through high school. So here's an example with my son, Sam. He was an all-state lacrosse player during a time when I was at the height of my executive career, traveling the globe constantly. And I knew very early that I couldn't be at every game, every tournament, every team dinner, every pep event that every mom was at. And because I was I think I was the only mom on that whole lacrosse team that was working. And so instead of assuming, I sat down with him and asked him a tough question. Where does my absence matter most to you? And how does it feel to you when I'm there and when I'm not there? And my kids were used to these really open and honest conversations, but Sam was my tough child. He was my younger child. And it wasn't an easy conversation because I had to do a lot of listening, and I like to talk. And then I listened some more and I asked questions and let him guide the conversation. And what surprised me was that it really wasn't being at every game. It wasn't, you need to be in the stands every time, Mom. What he said to me was, I don't want to be the kid without a mom. And what that meant was all of his friends had these stay-at-home moms. And what mattered to him was not being the one standing alone at these mom-centric moments, the team dinners, the gatherings where everyone else had someone there when they were all, when the moms were always there and it was the boys and their moms. And that was a really important distinction for me. So I had to shift my thinking and take the responsibility off of Sam so he didn't have to figure it out, like when were those events? And I put it all on me. And I worked with another mom that I knew really well, and I called her, asked her to be my accountability buddy, and said, please, can you help me make sure I don't miss these? Because those kind of events were, hard to figure out. And so she was really good to me. And I structured my schedule so that when these moments came up, I was there. It wasn't perfect. It didn't always work out. But again, I'm going to go back to that word that you and I are now aligned on, intentionality. And I made sure, and I worked, and my promise to Sam is I was going to be intentional about this. And yes, I also made sure I was there at some of the games, not because he asked it, but because I didn't want to miss those moments. And so I tried to be at some of the games, but the difference was I was no longer guessing. And I was there because Sam said, this is what I need from you. And it mattered to him. That conversation reshaped everything for me, Angela. And so that's what those mattering moments were about.
It's so insightful because that would have been a really easy opportunity to say, I just have to be at all the games, or I have to be at the majority of the games. But in reality, you're missing what's really important over here, which was some of those other moments where he wanted your presence at, I'm not even at that stage yet. So I know all those extracurriculars are coming, but yeah, with the team potluck with all the moms there, whatever it is, and yeah, those for me, I would, if I would have been in those shoes, I would have deprioritized those over the games, right? I would have assumed the games were the most important.
Exactly. And so, Angela, that's why my coaching is to be, and that goes back to the alignment with your children, alignment with your husband, your spouse, or whoever it might be. And when you align on those values, and if it's about alignment with your children or your husband, your spouse, your significant other, or your work, because this then showed up at work for me. I learned about, I better get in alignment with, my employee and what matters to them and my management. And because Sam also, what I learned from him, like you said, showing up at the games, he was like, I could care less if you're at the game because you yell too loud and it's embarrassing to me. And I was like, oh, well, but I love to yell. And he said, well, if you yell, can you please go way down there so I can't hear you? And I was like, okay. And it's like, so
Noted,
because that's
noted,
just
honey.
that's just him.
Yeah.
Whereas my daughter, she's in sports, and she wanted me at every game. She was a cyclist and an ice skater, and she wanted me to do her makeup, haul her bike everywhere. I mean, it was very different. So, and she wanted me yelling on the sideline, so that's why alignment with your children
Yeah.
is so in that conversation, and it changed in their seasons depending on what age they were at.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's why
I can
like, I
imagine.
loved how you wrote it, the mattering moments. When you wrote that, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so important. And I had to align with them so it worked for both of us. So I could do the career I wanted and raise the children
And
to be the people they are.
they feel like they're part of that equation. They feel like they're
Mm-hmm.
part
Yes.
of what you're creating
Yes.
too. And they've been a stakeholder in that conversation, and you all have made that decision together. I think that
Yes.
also, like any leadership lesson, right? So much of
Oh,
leadership,
yes.
of
Yes.
leadership just flows straight into the family and can
Yes.
be applied.
Yes. Yes. I
Always
can't,
catches you out
Angela,
of
I
nowhere.
can't tell you how much I learned from the child psychologist that then
Right.
translated it into leadership and how to be a better manager, a better partner at work. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. We're people after all, right? It all comes
Exactly.
down to people. Well, I feel like we're going to naturally, coming into rule 4, we're going to kind of fast forward a little bit into your career. I feel like we've kind of come through this natural progression of, when you're at this height of your executive career, let's say. And let's talk about rule number 4, following purpose and passion without apology, because one of the boldest rules you rewrote was walking away from this enterprise prestige, right? And stepping into the startup world, which it wasn't because you had to, but because you wanted to. And what told you were entering this new season? What kind of drove you? Because a lot of people are like, hey, I made it here. I'm going to hang my hat up over here and I'm going to retire and I'm going to feel really good about it. What told you were in a new season and needed to make that change?
Right. So for me, what started creeping into my life was prestige stopped motivating me. And I'm glad you brought that word up, prestige, because it's exactly what stopped motivating. And what was happening with me is I was working through execution, and it was time for me to start working through building. So prestige stopped motivating me, and curiosity was what I was craving. So, Angela, I loved big company leadership. As you said, I was working at DuPont. I was running this $3.5 billion nutrition and health portfolio across all of these big food ingredient businesses, real scale, real complexity. But as I said, after winning through execution, I really wanted to win through building. I was always an entrepreneur at heart, had it in my DNA. And I needed that opportunity to win through building. And in startups, you're closer to the customer and closer to the truth. Yeah, you can't hide behind the org chart. And that shift toward ownership, speed, and impact is very, you write the rules for me. And I wanted to be closer to impact, closer to building, closer to founders navigating real inflection points. So this was really my signal and what was changing within me. And it also coincided with the time when my children were leaving. The youngest was going off to college and I was becoming an empty nester. So it just really coincided with that time for closeness to the market and building and that change in my life.
And being able to, nurture something else in a different way, I think. One leaves the nest and you give yourself a whole new space to build in. Going from that enterprise executive role, and you and I have had this conversation even around what it means for some fractional leaders leaving big organizations and stepping into startup, right? And it's a big change. And I'm curious, what are some of those things that you had to unlearn to give yourself permission to take that leap, or even some of those just humbling lessons as you navigated into that startup space? I've heard some of these stories. I'd love for you to share with the candor that you bring to this conversation, some of those really hard lessons.
Yeah. So the first thing is I had to unlearn this idea that success only looks one way. Because, you think of in a big company, success looks like moving up, 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 up. And I had to learn that this is a big lesson, that unlearn the idea that moving on meant stepping down, because you're stepping very differently when you go into startups. So here's some of the lessons and what I had to unlearn. So for a long time, success meant being polished, prepared, and right. It meant consensus, because, Angela, you know this. In a big company, you're all about consensus building. And it means having answers before you speak. And it means minimizing uncertainty, especially as a woman in leadership. But stepping into this next season for me in startups is something very different. So I had to get really comfortable looking more vulnerable, because I can't be polished all the time in a startup. I have to be much more unpolished, more honest about what I don't know, because in a startup, you don't have all of those resources, and there's a lot you don't know, and you have to learn a whole lot very fast. So I have to get very comfortable with vulnerability and being less polished than I normally am. And I also have to unlearn perfection. Because, in a large company, you want to be like 90-10, 80-20 all the time.
Yeah.
And this is hard for me because, boy, I like looking really buttoned up. And I had to unlearn this belief that I have, and I know a lot of people in a large organization have this, that the credibility comes from everything being buttoned up, when in reality, the work I'm doing now requires curiosity much more than certainty. And then, and I'm going to talk about this consensus building here. I also had to unlearn that consensus building as a default. Because in a large organization, you want to get your ducks in a row, and consensus building keeps things moving. But in startups and in startup advisory work that I do, that actually slows things down. So you have to really trust your judgment and be willing to stand in decisions that you're not always universally comfortable in. You got to go fast. And so you have to live in this sometime 50-50, 60-40, and just go.
Make the best decision with the information that you have. And
yeah,
pivot if you have to later, but yeah, it can.
Exactly. So, for me, Angela, I wasn't leaving behind something because it stopped working for me. It was really about stepping into alignment with how I wanted to lead now, how I wanted to learn. And, it's really about contributing at this stage, at this season in my life. And so I love this whole unlearning thing, because it just gave me permission now to be where I am at this season in my life.
Yeah, I love that. And you've done so much incredible work since moving into this new season and the startups that you've worked with. And I want us to, as we come through this final rule, I'm excited for you to share with our listeners a little bit more about some of that work. But as we come into this final rule, which I think is like the cherry on top, let's talk about knowing your non-negotiables, which I think is important in any season of life. But
right.
Knowing when to draw the line when it comes to time, energy, money, and purpose. And I have to assume that your non-negotiables look different in every season.
Yes.
But, how did you identify what those were? But also, how have you protected those as you've moved through different stages of your life? Because I think it's one thing to write them down, but it's another thing to actually enforce that boundary every single day.
Yeah. So when we talk about those non-negotiables, I'll go back to getting very clear on your values. So, early, like in that stage when I was raising those kids, I was clear that it was about happy, healthy, productive children and this career. And those were clear non-negotiables. And so I focused on my children and the value I was delivering at work. And I protected those because a non negotiable isn't a preference. It's what you protect because it reflects what matters most in the season you are in your life. And now my non negotiables are around, around the type of work I'm doing. And that type of work I'm doing is the kind of company I'm working with, the type of people I'm working with. And so that's incredibly important to me because I'm in a different season. So I don't want to waste my time on people that aren't and the companies that aren't bringing something exciting and new to this industry that I love and value so much. And so if you don't have anything really high value that you're going to be making an important change in our industry and you aren't worth my time giving, like if I don't think you're brilliant and you're going to be driving and I've got to be able to help you, then I'm not going to waste my time. And the other thing there's a second piece of this is I want to protect my time at this stage in my life so that I can give that time to my family. I have aging parents. I have a husband that needs my time, and I want to give that to them. And then the third piece is I want to protect my time so I can give back to this industry, and especially to the women that are coming up in this industry, because I gained so much from this industry. I mean,
Good one.
I
We work in a great industry. It's
we
feeding
do.
feeding the world. How does it get better than that, right?
I know. And for me, like I want to protect enough time in my day, in my life to give back because and especially to being able to advise and support and mentor women, enough time in my calendar because I was so blessed by what I received others that, so many people, Angela, had just lifted me along the way and made me so successful because, we have a great industry that's so open and supportive of each other. And it's so I'm protecting space now so I can give back and be a part of how I honor that journey that I've been on.
And you're truly one of the people that I know that does this best because you live it every single day. I've seen it, I've witnessed it, but it's not just protecting that
Thank
time,
you.
but like the mental capacity and showing up and giving back to those women. It's been inspiring to see how you've done it over the years and me watching not just what you've given to the community, but I mean, you really do pause and I remember like the first time you even reached out to me, right? Like, and just saying how can I help? How can I support? But then standing behind that, I see a few different themes that show up in this space of giving back. And I think there's really good intentions, but sometimes there's a disconnect in actually the avenue and how to make that happen. Or it's really hard to protect that space. Maybe the avenues exist to give back, but it's really hard to protect that time, space, and mental capacity to do so. And I see you doing it on both lanes, and it's impressive, but also appreciated by so many that get to be in your circle and network.
It's such a joy.
Well, it's made such an impact. So I know as we close out, we're going to come into like what's happening now in your life. But one kind of important piece that I want to bring up is I'm curious if you could share, because you've seen a lot of leaders, right? You've worked with a lot of leaders. You've seen a lot of leaders. What happens when leaders don't necessarily define these boundaries or these non-negotiables for themselves? I'm curious, what are some of those characteristics that come up? Because I don't think we always know when we're doing it. And I think there's some characteristics that can bubble up when this comes into the picture.
Yeah. So if you don't define your non-negotiables, if you're not clear on your values and you're not clear on what's non-negotiable, then everything in your life becomes negotiable, including your health, your energy, your identity, even your identity. So for me, I find if I'm in a place, Angela, where I'm unclear on my values, my confidence slips. And I think, one time when I think it was when I did that workshop in Dallas, I think you and the group there heard a little bit of this, because I was like, what am I going to do in my next phase? I'm trying to figure things out. And then things become confusing and frustrating for the people around me. I also find if I let that management of my values, if I don't figure that out by time, get out of control, chaos can creep in my life. And I think that happens to other people as well. And that's when you get that chaos. And you hear that from younger women who have children and trying to manage a career. And then it's just like, chaos. And then what results in that? I'm not happy. And I find for me, I don't know if this happens to other women, but I start eating more. My exercise falls off. And then for me, and my husband's, not in the room right here, but it's like, he gets confused and he's like, what's up? Where are we going as a family? That's when burnout begins. And so that's why it's like, come back to what are my values right now? And so for me in this like changing season, I call it my phase 3 of my life. And it's like, what are the values that I want? And how do I get grounded in that? And then I put my non-negotiables. What do I have to change? What choices do I need to make? And then the rules are going to fall into place.
Yeah. And these rules work. They work every time. They're solid, right? And
yeah.
I think it's important, as we talked about, that everybody's list is going to look different, right? Everybody's in their different seasons. Everybody's careers are different. Their goals are different. And it's very much not about the comparison. And I think too often that's where we can get stuck, but really finding the alignment with yourself and then being very intentional behind it. I hope that as women or men or women, as they're listening to this, can find that moment to pause and reflect and think about, everything that we've shared, from the balance to aligning your values, your purpose, and following your passions to your non-negotiables. These are important lessons to learn by, and I think lived and learned by you over the past decades. And so really appreciate you sharing them. So share with our listeners, this is your 3rd chapter. What are you doing now? What's most exciting in Michelle's life?
Yeah. So what I'm moving into is fractional work, advisory work, and a little bit of consulting. And I'm being selective about who and what I'm doing, who I'm working with, and the kind of work I'm going to be working in. So my ask for the organization is to help me network out to the startups and the small companies that need that kind of experience that I have, to help bring that technology to the marketplace and use that wisdom and experience I have to accelerate that commercialization and build that value for that exciting technology that is just waiting to get to the marketplace and create that success.
I love that. And we'd even fully tell our listeners, like, the technologies that you've been a part of, though. So from leading global enterprise organizations like DuPont and the really heavy in that B2B ingredient side, but also your last 10 years or so have really been in this biotech space. And so as you talk about bringing these technologies, I'm curious if you could tell our listeners a little bit more around the technologies that you really want to be leaning into in this next chapter.
Yeah, so I'm super excited about the kind of things that are going on in food tech. In biotech, I have worked in the gut microbiome. I've done work across all kinds of proteins and I've been working in sweeteners. I have been working in lots of fermentation type products, in fibers, in prebiotics, and postbiotics, in lots of different kinds of health and wellness. So it's just an exciting time to be impacting how we can help bring up the nutrition in our food supply chain. And what I'm really thrilled about is, despite the fact in the food tech industry, we've had a real dry period over the last 5 years of creating success in new innovations in the food tech space. I'm just very proud to share that I have not only IPO'd a company in the gut microbiome, but I have also sold a company and have created quite a few partnerships. So I've had my share of failures, but I have seen successes. And so I've been one of those people, as Angela said, have had big blue chip experience, but have also done startups successfully as well.
I love it. Looking at both sides of that industry. But well, I'm personally excited to see what this next phase brings you, because I think it's going to be an exciting one. And those wherever you end up consulting or serving into next, I think are going to be lucky to have your experience with them. Well, where can individuals find you? Where can they connect with you?
Oh, check me out on LinkedIn, and I respond quickly to direct messages or any kind of message on LinkedIn. And Angela, if I could leave the women with one thing I want you to hear from this podcast today, and we've been talking a lot about balance. What I want you to hear today is that there is no balance. There are only seasons, values, and choices. And when those align, the rules are going to write themselves. And I want to make sure that every woman finds that in themselves so they can create the life and the career that they want for themselves.
I love that. I love that. I couldn't have said it better to end our show here today. Michele, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your stories, your rules so generously with the audience, and just for your continued leadership.
Thank you. And you too, Angela. I am so impressed with your leadership, and I'm grateful to be part of your organization.
Thank you so much. And for our audience, if you found this episode helpful and insightful, truly the best way you can help us is by sharing this with a friend, connecting with us on social, or commenting. I can't begin to tell you how long and how far that goes when getting the word out. So thank you so much for your support. It truly means a lot to us, because at the end of the day, we're not just making food, we're making moves. We're women who make it. We'll see you next time.